I'm David Knowles, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, we'll share the latest updates from the battle for Donbass as fierce fighting continues across the region, and we discuss the role and relevance of the UN in the conflict.
This hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
Every weekday afternoon, I sit down with leading journalists from the Telegraph's London newsroom and our teams reporting on the ground to bring you the latest news and analysis on the war in Ukraine. It's the 29th of April, day 65. And today I'm joined by Defence and Security Editor Dominic Nicholls, Assistant Foreign Editor Katie O'Neill, and Mutaz Ahmed from our comment team. Just a quick note from me, Monday is a public holiday in the United Kingdom, so instead of our daily show, we have an interview with Campbell McDermott, a Telegraph journalist who's been reporting from the ground in Ukraine. I started by asking Dom for the latest updates from the front lines.
Hi David, hi everybody. It's been quite a busy time in the last 24 hours, mainly indirect fire, artillery and missiles. Russia has put a lot of fire across most of the country, to be honest. Strikes in Kiev, which we will talk about a little bit later, coinciding, possibly even because of the visit of UN Secretary-General Antonio Gutierrez, killed at least one person, a journalist for Radio Free Europe, and injured many more. Other than that, in the Donbass, there have been small tactical gains by Russia. It's quite interesting what's happening there. We could dig into this a little bit more, but Russia, as we've mentioned before, just hasn't really been able to get the combined arms manoeuvre together. So all the different parts of the military working in concert. It was all a bit piecemeal. They're not there yet, but they're doing better. And what that's enabling is small incremental gains. Ukraine has been ceding ground for time and then choosing to counterattack at a place and a time and place of their own choosing. But there have been some sort of shifts to the villages in the sort of central Donbass region. Ukraine has made some advances in the north and to the northeast of Kharkiv. There have been some Ukraine's pushed back there, and in the south around Kherson, sort of up towards Zaporizhia, Russia has tried to push there, although they've not been very successful. And the south, you'll remember, has been in the first few weeks of the war anyway. That's where they had the most operational success. So if any of the military districts seemed to know what they were doing, it was the south. So it's assessed that in the south they are needling the Ukrainian forces in order to fix them down there, so they can't then go and Ukraine can't go and reinforce their positions in the Donbass. So it sounds like the south might be a sort of fix and demonstration, if you like, with still the main effort in the Donbass. I'll pause there.
Just very quickly, Dom, before we bring in Katie, can I just ask, when you say they're fixing them there, how exactly are they doing that? What are they doing exactly there?
Well, it's a bit like, if you remember, there still is a threat from the Black Sea Fleet, what's left of the Black Sea Fleet after the Moskva has been sunk. But the thing about an amphibious force, and this isn't a complete tangent, so when I say amphibious force, think big manoeuvre elements of Russian forces in South Ukraine. The thing about amphibious forces, you don't know where it's going to be. You don't know what it's going to do. Can you ever afford to take your eye off the ball? And it's a bit like that around Kherson and in that the sort of southwest extent of the Russian gains so far. I mean, they've got a huge number of forces there. They're very well supplied from Crimea. They've been obviously in Crimea since 2014 when they illegally annexed it. So they've got a big rear base there. So they're very well supported, and it's a sizable force that's demonstrated operational and tactical success so far in the war. So even though the front line hasn't moved a huge amount there, and these threats to and attempts to go round Mykolaiv and to Odessa, and we've heard in the last few days talk of Transnistria as well. You can't totally discount that. So Ukraine has not been able to take forces out of there to go and reinforce where the main fighting seems to be in the Donbass, because as the old military saying that the So old, I can't remember it. No, the enemy's feint is the attack that you take your eye off. I'll completely mangle that. I'll have a think about it and come back. But Ukraine can't take their eye off those forces in the south because they are still a very potent force.
Thanks, Dom. Katie, do you want to add to any of that?
Hi, David. Yeah, there was an interesting report overnight, an intelligence briefing from the Pentagon, where they were discussing the conditions in the Donbass. Obviously, that's the area that as we all know, that the Russians are focusing in on now. And the Pentagon was saying that the muddy conditions there are really hampering the advance of Russian troops. They're calling their advance slow and uneven. And the reason for that is, obviously, the tanks are getting bogged down there, and it drives tanks onto more main established roads where they're more vulnerable to confrontation and attacks and being targeted by Ukrainian guerrilla forces. So interesting that as the weather's getting better, spring conditions, the soil is softening, and it's also been raining quite a bit in that region in the east during the past week. So that is having an effect on Russians as they're trying to advance. The Pentagon briefing also said that Russians' losses are much bigger than Ukraine's so far, as that battle continues to rage in the east. Just as they wanted to have this lightning capture of Kiev in the beginning of the invasion, it was also hoped by the Russians that they would, at a very fast pace, conquer Donbass, and we're seeing that hasn't come to pass.
Thanks, Katie. Mutaz, do you have anything to add to that, or shall we talk about the UN Secretary General's visit to Kiev yesterday?
I think they covered that pretty well. The key point is that the Russians aren't advancing anywhere near as quickly as they expected, even in this second round. This second stage, they're failing quite badly. So that's interesting.
Thank you very much. Well, let's do it. Antonio Gutierrez was in Kiev yesterday, and the Russian forces fired on the city. What happened?
So this came after Antonio Gutierrez, UN Secretary General, visited Moscow earlier in the week and went to Ukraine yesterday. He visited Bucha, the area to the northwest of the capital, where the atrocities that have been uncovered so far have been reported, so he met President Zelensky. A number of quotes. I mean, he said he was shocked, fair enough, and he says that the UN is, and this is a quote, not part of present political negotiations, but we are following them with a lot of interest and hoping they will solve the problem and that peace will come back. I mean, I have been beating this drum many years now, really, and I don't mean to sound like a stuck record, but I just expect better from the UN Secretary General. I mean, everything he says is correct. He said Mariupol is an apocalypse. He says we're at ground zero for the world we need to build. Mariupol is a crisis within a crisis. The civilians need an escape route out of the apocalypse. I mean, this is all. It's correct. He's not wrong. To be fair to him, he did say that the war is a failure of the Security Council. But he was interviewed on Al Jazeera, and he said that it was up President Zelensky had put it to him that what is Russia doing as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and Mr. Gutierrez said, well, it's up for that's because of the UN Charter, and to change the Charter, the General Assembly of the UN, as in the wider body where every country is represented, has to be a 2/3 majority to change the Charter, and 2/3 majority, and all 5 of the P5 nations. So, a very long way to go before we can change the rules and have some effect on potentially removing Russia from the P5. But I just expect better from Mr. Gutierrez and from the UN. So he's in Kiev. At least he's there. I'm trying to look for the positives here. He's there. He's saying a lot of the right things. He's just not saying enough of them. And whilst he was there, Kyiv, for the first time in weeks, came under renewed shelling. This was described by the Ukrainian authorities as a postcard from Moscow. I mean, if ever there was a demonstration that Russia holds, I mean, if it holds UN in contempt, then at least Russia's thinking about the UN. I'm not even sure they care that much. They just do not care. Putin does not care. They write their own rules. We're all expected to adhere to it. Shelling Kyiv whilst the UN Secretary General is there is just such an egregious act in terms of what it says about how little the UN is viewed. It's just staggering. And as I said earlier, there were casualties, and we've yet to hear hear any more from Mr. Gutierrez.
Mutaz and Katie, I'm sure you both have some thoughts on this.
I agree with Dom. It's a humiliation for Gutierrez and the United Nations. They basically wiped the floor with him. I was speaking to a reporter this morning who's in Moscow actually. So I'm not going to name them. But what they noticed was that there was hardly any coverage of the UN visit. You'd expect the opposite, but it was almost as if the Kremlin intentionally set out to make Gutierrez look irrelevant. But the facts are the facts, and there is only so much he can do. For as long as Russia is a member of the Security Council, he has to represent Russia too. That's just a fact, and we can talk about kicking Russia out of the UN Security Council, but people who advocate that have to answer, the question of if we kick Russia out, how do we get the world's big nuclear powers round the table? You eventually end up producing the same sort of institution, and underlying the problem is the fact that a fair chunk of the world doesn't see this the way we in the West do. Russia has some powerful backers. Countries such as India and China do not agree with the UK, US, EU perspective. And that's at least one other UN Security Council nation. So there's no easy answer to this. Effectively, the UN is a reflection of the world order. And when the world order breaks down, the UN breaks down. And so there's a more fundamental point, which is one of the countries that are expected to police that is expected to police world affairs has become violent and has become an agitator and has started wars of conquest in Europe, and that leaves a sort of massive gap where fill it with what you want, but there are no easy answers, basically. And so it's probably a good thing that the UN Secretary General is trying to speak to both sides. But essentially that trip reflected the hole that we're in, this massive muddle we're in, which is there isn't much anyone can do at the moment.
If I could just come back, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with Mutaz, and maybe I've come out of the blocks a bit quickly, but I mean, in terms of those that advocate that the UN needs reform, of which I'm one, what would you put in its place? Well, I mean, we can have the conversation. The 2/3 rule seems to work for the General Assembly, so why don't we have that in the Security Council? Why don't we have 2/3 rule in the P5? So three of the five have to agree to get it through. I mean, of course, it's easy to say those things. There'll be bits and bobs that fall out of all of that, but I think we could at least have the conversation now. And I don't think it's good enough for Ms. Gutierrez to stand in Kiev and say, and this is a quote, "I think it's very important to spare this wonderful city. Kiev is a city with an enormous historical value. It represents everything for both Ukrainians and Russians, and I hope that Kiev will be spared." I mean, it's just word salad. It doesn't do anything. I mean, yes, it's a wonderful city. I've been there. It is a wonderful city. But, I mean, just talking in those terms, using the word spare, he hopes it's spared. He hopes it will be spared. I mean, from whom? I mean, who's doing this? Who is attacking Kiev such that it needs to be spared? We seem to be leaving a very large sort of Russian-shaped elephant out of the room here. So I accept that it's difficult, and he's right to go, and what he's saying is correct, but I think he should say more. He should point the finger at Russia, and I think there are mechanisms where we could reform the UN, or at least have the conversation. End of rant.
Yes, but if you begin to remove major non-Western nuclear powers from UN institutions, you will not have a UN at the end of it. You will have a body representing Western interests alone. And we have those bodies. We have the EU, we have NATO. The point of the UN is it's supposed to bring all the world's major powers together. If you begin to we can turn on Russia, of course we can. But when you remove Russia from decision-making bodies, the the Chinese. The UN become discredited in China and in some Eastern countries and in many of the African countries that actually don't take our position on this. And we saw this happen with the International Criminal Court, for instance, which is not considered a credible court in much of Africa. It's not considered a credible court in much of South America because it took this sort of stance where it was very proactive in going after non-Western criminals, while countries such as America aren't even signatories. Right? The UN is a reflection of this. It's frustrating because yes, it's frustrating to see Russia in these positions, with this veto in the Security Council. But that is only a reflection of the mess we're in. And if you don't deal with the fact that we're faced with a nuclear power that is incredibly aggressive, you can't fix it. I guess my point is that isn't the solution is much more. It will take much more than just removing. It's too easy, basically, and this will probably end militarily with Russia either getting bogged down or Russia winning, and that renders, because Russia is a major nuclear power, it renders the UN and it renders much of diplomacy really irrelevant for now.
I hate those that spout easy. Sorry, hate, that's a very strong word. I hate the suggestion that there are easy answers to complex problems. I mean, there are not. I'm not suggesting there are. I'm not suggesting that we kick Russia off the UN or the Security Council or anything. But I'm just saying we need to have a conversation, and it basically boils down to: is the UN a mirror or a lifebelt? So is it a mirror just showing the world where we are at the moment in 21st century, or however you want to take the date from? Is it just a mirror of humanity? Or is it a lifebelt sort of pulling humanity forwards and trying to overcome some of the worst aspects of what it is to be human and show us a brighter future and lead us to a better place? So, yeah, mirror or lifebelt, a debate that will rumble on and has rumbled on forever. But, yes, I'm just a bit frustrated with the UN right now.
Thanks, Dom and Mutaz. I think that discussion actually just shows the nuances and the complications to do with this question. Let's get back to Ukraine. Casey O'Neill, is there anything else we need to comment on that's happening in the country before we talk about President Biden's request to Congress?
No, I think as we've discussed, the Donbass and the Kiev situation are the most recent actions in terms of things happening on the ground in Ukraine. That strike that occurred in Kiev, one of the targets was a 25-storey building, a residential building. As Dom has said, there was a casualty. It's also been reported that someone lost their leg in that attack. That was the postcard from Putin. So those have, along with Donbass, that's where we've seen the most military action in the past couple of hours and days.
Thank you very much. Can we talk then about President Biden's request to Congress? What's happening there, Casey O'Neill?
Yeah, so Biden has asked for a further $33 billion to be approved in funding from the US to the Ukraine. Last month or to date, I think their funding is somewhere at 13 billion or thereabouts, so double what they have already pledged. I think what this is indicative of is the fact that the US and the West don't see this conflict as something that is going to be resolved anytime soon. The fact that the funding that the US is and Joe Biden is seeking is so large, it speaks to the need to reinforce the kit that the Ukrainians have, and also a belief that the war isn't going to end anytime soon. Interestingly, Biden said yesterday that for every Russian tank that there is, the West and the US has given 10 anti-tank weapons for each of those 1 tanks that the Russian army has. So, I mean, the support that they've given is no small thing thus far, but a further hope for Biden that he can secure those funds from Congress to deliver more military aid to Ukraine.
Mutaz and Dom, anything to come in on that?
I'd just say we shouldn't underestimate what a number that is. Not only is it 33 billion, it's colossal, but in order that and it's not gone through yet, we should admit, but the bipartisan support it would take, that's been pretty solid so far. I mean, that does speak of very strong US resolve here. It's notable. They're in for the long haul.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's a massive number, and it's a reflection of sort of journey we've been on. Right, there was a time when the West was very reluctant to provide armory, and now we're talking about heavy weapons and plane parts and $33 billion worth of support, and it's a signal, most importantly, to the Kremlin that the West will continue to supply Ukraine, even if this becomes a long war, as the likes of Liz Truss fear.
Thank you very much, Mutaz. Dom Nicholls, I know you had some thoughts earlier about Russian generalship in Ukraine. Do you want to talk us through what you were thinking?
So this has come from a number of areas, yet to be confirmed, but credible sources are reporting that the head of Russia's armed forces, so General Valery Gerasimov, has been moved to Ukraine to either take control of the entire theatre or for the Battle of the Donbass, that battle being absolutely pivotal and significant. So, I mean, Valery Gerasimov, just to be clear, this is not Vitaly Gerasimov, the Major General, Chief of Staff of the 41st Army, who was killed a few weeks ago. So Valery Gerasimov, the head of the entire Russian armed forces, if this is correct, if he's been moved down there, then that is absolutely staggering. It's firstly to take someone of that position from effectively what's a policy position, put him into an operational appointment, is interesting. And secondly, what does it say of General Dvornikov, who apparently, after Russia withdrew from the north of the country and reconstituted in Belarus and Russia, ready for this fight in Donbass, Russia said that General Dvornikov was going to be the overall theatre commander and bring a sense of coherence and coordination and unity to the effort. So if that's now not the case, what has gone wrong? Is this a suggestion that Putin wanted a result in the last couple of weeks, which I don't think any sensible military observer would say was ever likely to happen? Or is Dvornikov now in charge of the Donbass and Gerasimov is in charge of the overall theatre? And what does it say of home? I mean, if there's nobody there in Moscow acting as Putin's principal military advisor, that's quite staggering as well. So, I mean, very, very odd, and it speaks a completely sort of topsy-turvy way that many other countries would have done it. So many other countries, particularly in the West, go for a sort of we try and push initiative or push decision making down to the lowest possible level to encourage initiative and let the person on the ground, the low level military commander at whatever rank that is, in whatever position, who has a better understanding of the problem set in front of them and probably a better idea of how to solve it, let them get on with it rather than impose these ideas from above. So this very top down, literally top down from the top of the military into theatre. If this is correct, it speaks of all sorts of command and control problems, which it might solve. I'm not denying. I mean, they're not going. If they've done it, they're not going to do it just for fun. They're going to hope to resolve this. But I mean, it would need a pretty spectacular plan from General Gerasimov that is then put in place by what has so far been a fairly suboptimal, pretty average performance by the military on the ground, to have made this a good decision. So, like I say, treat it with a note of caution because we've yet to have it properly confirmed yet, and it does seem quite staggering. But very interesting that General Gerasimov, the architect, you may remember, of the Gerasimov Doctrine, which is supposed to be how to do warfare in the 21st century, this blend of military and economic and sort of information and a bit of espionage and economics and so on and so forth, how to wield all the levers of power. We'll see what he's like as an operational commander. There's a difference between being an operational commander, sort of blood and guts General MacArthur type figure, and being a military intellectual, if you like. Sort of Clausewitz did not have a fantastic record as an operational field commander, but he knew his onions and he could write a fairly thick book that's propping open the fire door. So Gerasimov might be out of that mold. He might be able to articulate it on paper, but whether or not he can put it into practice is interesting, and he may not be able to. So we shall see. Firstly, we need to confirm that this is this has happened. Secondly, we need to take a view on, well, what does that mean for the theatre and for Dvornikov and any increased resources that might go that way. And it's all running up to the May the 9th date, as we've discussed many times, that is likely to, or no longer likely to be used to announce any kind of victory, but could be used as an opportunity to call for wider mobilisation and seek greater international support. Maybe even Putin using, referring to it as a war, declaring war. So, very interesting moves at the highest echelons of Russian command and control to watch out for.
Thanks, Dom. Can we look back towards at the beginning of the war? New details have come out about the first few days and President Zelensky's compound in Kiev. Casey O'Neill, can you tell us what we've discovered about those first few hours?
Yeah, this was a really interesting profile that the Time magazine has done on Zelensky. As much as he's been such a prominent figure, and rightly so, since the invasion began, detail on his movements and how he has fared personally since the invasion began have been quite scant, but this profile sheds some light on that. It's interesting that he bunkered down for a time in his compound, but it really was according to his profile, very poorly reinforced. His security team were handed automatic weapons, according to this piece of writing, but many of them apparently didn't know how to use them. The back gate to the compound was very poorly secured with plywood. When you imagine, he's enemy number one for Putin, and he's in this very poorly guarded compound, it's difficult to conceive of. Also in that report is the suggestion that both the US and the UK were encouraging Zelensky to leave Ukraine, and not just Kiev, but to leave Ukraine and to set up a government in exile somewhere else, presumably somewhere like Poland. But he didn't entertain that idea for a minute. He gave a quote to Time magazine that featured in this article, in which he acknowledged that he's a symbol, and that beyond being a politician and a leader, he's also a symbol for people, and his show of resilience is important to them there. So it's just an interesting insight into his movements. He pops up very, very frequently, giving addresses to parliaments by video link most days, and doing interviews. But this sort of personal insight into to where he's been and his strategy is quite interesting and illuminating to read. He is an enigmatic character, as we all know. He started as a soap star. He was on the equivalent of Strictly Come Dancing in Ukraine, and he's really just shone. I don't think many commentators have analysts have a lot to say that's negative about Zelensky. So interesting that we have this profile showing how he spent the beginning stages of the invasion.
Absolutely. Mutaz, Ahmed, I'm sure you have some thoughts about what we've learnt about Zelensky's, I think we can call it heroism in the early hours of the war.
Yeah, heroism. It's interesting. We talk a lot about sort of modern weapon systems, stealth drones, and as if war is sort of automatic, when actually fundamentally in this war, like every other war, traditional aspects of just leadership matter. It still matters to have a leader who is brave and honourable and a leader who sort of represents valour. Those are the kinds of traits we saw in war leaders here in Britain too, and we've known for some time that Zelensky is an incredibly impressive man, but I think when the history books are written, so when we look back on this, we may even find that we underestimated the impact he had, and I just hope it continues. But it's also a reminder of how wrong we got the war at the start. Our assumptions about Ukraine's survival were completely off. We were right to warn that Russia was about to invade. Our intelligence was correct. but we thought Ukraine would collapse within days, and that was the root of those efforts to get Zelensky out. Well, we're 3-4 months in, and Ukraine's still surviving. So we got that completely wrong, and Zelensky was right.
Thanks, Mutaz. Is there anything else you think we need to discuss before we go on to potentially either a reader question, or I know Dom Nicholls has been doing more research about the Dolphins that the Russian military are apparently employing in the Black Sea?
I think we should probably discuss the Britons who have, or should I say, the Briton who has lost their life in Ukraine. It's the first British national to die during the war in Ukraine. His name was Scott Sibley, who's a 36-year-old who served in the Royal Marines previously, and he's part of the International Legion. He was in Mykolaiv, where he died during Russian shelling. We think maybe yesterday, the day before. Starting to get a profile of him coming through. He had a daughter with a rare form of cancer who he did a lot of fundraising for, and he's survived by her. There's also another British man who has yet to be publicly identified, who is missing, we think, in Mykolaiv as well, and also reports this morning that 2 British men who were working in humanitarian aid have been captured by the Russians in Zaporizhia. So these men we do have identities for. They were working for a not-for-profit British charity called Presidium Network, and they were stopped at a Russian checkpoint last night when we believe that they were captured. The people that they were checking in with noted that the text messages that they were receiving from these 2 men became increasingly different to how they would usually engage. And their families and their next of kin are saying that they were captured by the Russians because they have been accused of being British spies. So a lot of movement in the past day or two in terms of how British lives are being wrapped up into the conflict.
Thanks, Katie. If Mutaz or Dom have anything to add, do say now. Otherwise, I think we should turn to Dom, what you've discovered about these military dolphins.
Can I just say very quickly that
Please.
There's a very important distinction between those who tragically die after joining the International Legion. So I think that one death yesterday was someone who was fighting as part of the International Legion. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Katie. When you join something like that, you take on responsibility, and you take on you take on an element of risk. There's a difference between that and what we're seeing now with what looks like humanitarian workers captured. That could become very, very political, and we could see a lot of tension arising from that, because those people, I think, are, or all the evidence suggests, they're not fighters. So that could lead to some form of escalation. That's one to watch out for.
Yeah, that is an important distinction to make, and I thank you for making it. And yes, you are correct. Scott Sibley he was working with the International Legion in Mykolaiv.
Well, thank you both. Dominic Nicholls, you've been speaking to sources about these dolphins. Will you tell us what you found?
So after yesterday's chat, when we were talking about the dolphin pens that have been identified from satellite imagery around the Sevastopol port, the Russian port in Crimea, I was asking around why dolphins. As we said yesterday, animals have been used across history for military effect, and they still are. There's been a lot of research for decades into dolphins and their amazing capability for sonar, and how that could better human warfare. And so we were just trying to work out what was happening here. So I was asking a few naval sources, a few people who know much more about these things than I do, and yeah, it is unsurprisingly, it's all down to the sonar. These dolphins are amazingly capable of finding things under the water, and it was suggested to me that this was not that they would necessarily go and attack a diver, if you like, or do something like that, or mark the position. And suggestions, I think there have been trials to try and get dolphins to drop things, either markers that could then signal, or paint dye in the water when they see things under the water. I don't think they've come to fruition, or not been they're not that sophisticated. But a bit of a grim ending to the story, I'm afraid. But I was told that actually what they can do is they can spot things, underwater mines, underwater autonomous vehicles, so drones, submarines, and if you strap explosives to a dolphin and they go and then find something, you'd be able to attack it by setting off the charge, killing the dolphin and killing whatever else is there. So it's not particularly edifying. The source I spoke to, who I do trust, he said that this capability of strapping devices to dolphins and then letting them free or in a certain area you want to cover. So a submarine pen would be a good example. If all your boats are out or in, you're not going in and out. You can then sort of have this area relatively free to allow the mammals to go and do what they want to do. And if they see something, then you can have an effect. But yeah, ultimately it involves killing the dolphin and potentially knocking out whatever was coming towards it. But the source said to me this capability does exist if you have a heart of stone, and I think that's what it would take. So fairly grim to end the week on. I'm sorry about that, but I did promise you an answer. So there we go. Dolphins and bombs.
Thanks, Dom. Just because it's the end of the week and we've seen fighting ramp up in the Donbass and with no end of the conflict, it feels like in sight at the moment. Can I get your thoughts of what are the sort of what do we think might happen in the next few weeks? What are the worst case scenarios, and also what are the best?
I think we know that the forces in Mariupol, the Ukrainian resistance there is really hanging on by a thread. That steelworks plant where both Ukrainian soldiers and civilians are sheltering. Today, Ukraine said that they're going to try and evacuate the civilians that are still in that steel plant. Russia said in theory during the Gutierrez visit earlier in the week that in theory that they would comply with calls from the Red Cross and the UN to facilitate some sort of humanitarian corridor there. So, I mean, they've said this kind of thing in terms of humanitarian corridors previously, where they have said that they've agreed to them and then shelled those routes and attacked those routes. But hopefully, as the Ukrainians hope to do today, they can get some of the people still trapped in that steelworks plant out, because we know that they are without a lot of food stock, and there are a lot of injured soldiers in that steelworks that require medicine and care. But yes, important to say that the evacuation is going to be focused on civilians and not on the soldiers that are also there.
Mutaz or Dom?
I'm the next big thing I'm watching out for is May 9th. Dom mentioned this earlier. You know, we should get a strong indication of where Putin wants this war to go. We should listen to whether he formally declares war and therefore full mobilization. We should listen carefully to what he says his objectives are, what his officials say their objectives are, and we should watch how they celebrate. You know, there have been suggestions that there might be some marches, perhaps in Ukraine, that there might be some sort of activity in Mariupol. You know, these will give us indications too of, Putin's war objectives, whether they're happy with just holding on to what they have currently, or whether they want to move forward and start capturing areas which they perhaps have withdrawn from since the first stage of the war. So that's an important date. It's not quite a victory day for Russia, but it will give us some strong indications.
I think you've got to look at the Donbass. I mean, Russia's war's not gone well so far, and if you want a visual metaphor for that, have a look online. You'll see images from foreign aid in Russia where there's a Russian counter battery radar on the low loader on a truck being driven through the city, and went under a bridge, and it was the bridge wasn't big enough. So the counter-battery radar, hugely sophisticated piece of equipment, has just spanked straight into a bridge. I mean, there's the metaphor for Russia's war so far. But in the Donbass, if Russia can get its combined arms manoeuvre together, then there could be problems, big problems for Ukraine. The heavy artillery that's been promised, and that is flowing in, is not there yet in all the numbers it needs to be. And Ukraine needs this heavy artillery to hold the Russian artillery back, because the ground elements, tanks and infantry basically, are now inching forward underneath this sort of rolling barrage and this umbrella from the artillery, as they should have been doing all along. And so Ukraine need to push that umbrella back, push that heavy artillery back, so that it either exposes the Russian ground forces, or they still go forward and they can be nibbled off by the anti-tank teams, as we've seen before. So there's not enough heavy weaponry yet, heavy artillery yet, in the Donbass on the Ukrainian side, and there's the risk that Russia, just these incremental advances, they're going to make a breakthrough. If the Donbass falls, then that is a very, very significant act in this war, and we will see whether or not it was the main objective all along, as they suggest. And I remember the quote that I mangled at the start of this chat, for which I apologise. And we will see whether or not the attack in the north was just a diversion, because of course the quote is, "The diversion you've been ignoring will turn out to be the enemy's main attack." And we'll finally see whether the Donbass was Russia's main objective all along.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 30 days completely free at telegraph.co.uk/audio. Or sign up to Dispatches, our Ukraine newsletter, which brings stories from our award-winning foreign correspondents straight to your inbox. Today, Ukraine the Latest was produced by Louisa Wells and Giles Gear, and on Twitter, Alice Hearing.